All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 113. My name's Bobak Kyrie. I'm going to be joined by my regular hosts, Sirius and JD. And in fact, I see Sirius right now. So it's Tuesday night. We love hearing from you. We love hearing what your thoughts are about college football. And goodness, do we have a lot to talk about? Not only is it the CFP, but it's the silly season. So we've got lots of things to talk about around coaches, around obviously last weekend's games, the games that are upcoming. So whatever you feel like. So if you want to talk, feel free to hit request and we'll send you an invite to speak. JD, Sirius, have you joined us?
Yep, we're here. Fantastic. Tuesday night. We are in the final moments of November. Looking forward to a championship weekend, bowl season, and of course, the silly season of the coaching carousel. So many headlines to talk about. Can't wait to talk about.
Sirius, have you made it up or is it?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. So, yeah, again, if you have thoughts on what's going on in college football, we'd love to talk to you. Obviously, a lot of positions are still open, although some have closed, including Auburn specifically. But, that opens up others. Heck, even Liberty's now open because of that. And UNLV was a big kind of surprise. Not the biggest surprise in the universe, but I think some folks were thinking Marcus Arroyo would get a little bit more time there. Western Michigan let go of Tim Lester, and of course, all the others that are open. Cincinnati's going to have to find someone new. Texas State, Stanford, Tulsa, USF seems to have. I don't understand quite what USF is trying to do. They say they have somebody, but clearly they must be coaching still because they're going to wait till Sunday to announce it. They gave a teaser yesterday, kind of one of those sort of cryptic messages that, oh, wouldn't it be nice if this was over, referring to their coaching search. And then today, one of the reporters in the area announced that they're going to have that announcement on Sunday. So it's probably someone who's a current coach. Now, who that is remains to be seen. But at least for the most part, that seems to take off the table coaches who were more free agents. Like, gosh, Tom Herman's been tossed around with so many names and so many, I should say, positions out there, as well as some of the others. In addition, we've got, we'll see where things are going to go with Georgia Tech. Now the rumor seems to be they're going to promote their interim head coach. UAB seems to want to have somebody by December 5th. That's the big day for a lot of people because December 5th is the opening of the transfer portal. And that is when a lot of these athletic directors and the coaches would like to have that start to get things moving. Yeah, so JD, what's been on your mind this evening so far? And again, if you'd like to join the conversation, hit request.
Well, so far, I think, at least the things that have struck out in my mind so far as being, I think, a little bit more strange on the silly season. I'm going to start with that because obviously right now, the playoffs, you've got a very clear top four revealed tonight. I don't think there's really any surprises. USC and TCU win, they're in. TCU might even be able to get in if it's a close loss. I think Georgia and Michigan are guaranteed no matter what happens on Saturday. So at least in terms of what's happening with the season, I think it's now you just got to kind of look more towards, is it going to be UCF or Tulane getting that spot for the G5? Are we going to get some interesting bowl matchups? Maybe we get like a Mizzou, Kansas in the Liberty Bowl or something else like that. I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about with that. But the one that I do want to talk about is just some of the wild connections that are happening right now in the coaching carousel. And the one that really has my mind right now is Bruce Feldman reporting earlier today from The Athletic that at the UNLV search, I think a lot of people were very surprised with Marcus Arroyo being let go, especially given that all systems appear to look that UNLV wants to accept a bowl game. They're high up there in APR, likely to take a bowl opportunity because we should have enough openings. But Bruce Feldman reporting that Gary Patterson is now the name to watch for that position. If you told me that Gary Patterson was taking another head coaching job, I wouldn't have been surprised after this stint at Texas. But to take the UNLV job, that one just kind of seems out of nowhere and kind of a little bit of an odd cultural fit, if you ask me. But still very, very fascinated. You mentioned Tom Herman being rumored for places like Cincinnati. You've got all these other coaches who have been available on the market. And then, of course, with Liberty being opened up, who knows what kind of can of worms they're going to develop with that one.
JD, I mean, if you think about it, Gary Patterson to UNLV, it kind of makes sense because, I mean, that's just what happens with aging stars who aren't ready to totally quit. At the end of your career, you just go and do prolonged stay in Vegas and kind of, play the hits until you're ready to actually retire.
I just want to add to that real quick. UNLV actually has had that history. I mean, probably the most notable head coach, I mean, that fits into that was John Robinson. Long after he had faded out at USC, because he won a national championship in the late 70s for USC and then went to coach the Rams and then had a really disastrous second not super disastrous. And there have been far worse second tenures, but it wasn't Schneider returning to K-State. This was someone who he returned and he got to one Rose Bowl and then kind of petered out. I remember I was a student during that time, and they fired him over voicemail. And then a few years later, he reemerged at UNLV, and by that time he was quite old. And then sort of became eventually their a head coach and AD, and then just became an AD because he couldn't get UNLV going anywhere at that point. His coaching, I think he was sub 500 during his time there. So it wouldn't be totally unheard of for someone to decide to try and kind of have a place where, but although UNLV seems to be a little bit more high stress now, especially now that they're playing in that lovely stadium right now. And I'm never going to say UNLV is a sleeping giant because they've never been a giant at any point, but it seems like there is a lot more potential there. We have somebody up here, and we love to welcome in callers. So Cody, what's up? What's on your mind?
Hey guys, I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. Just my question would be, say USC wins this weekend on Friday against Utah, and say a conference champion, like say one of the teams that are already locked in, lose. How realistic is it that USC could move up maybe to the 3 or 2 spot? I'm really only asking because I live in Arizona and I would love to go watch them play in Arizona. So just kind of a biased question, I guess. Is it realistic, or are they going to pretty much be 4 if they win on Friday?
I think if anything else, it's going to depend on how they win. I mean, if they go in and they blow out Utah, we're talking something like 49-7 or something else like that, or some other really atoning factor. I think that gets them the opportunity to jump up, especially if, you have a TCU stumble. I feel if Michigan ends up stumbling as well. I mean, if you lose to Purdue, that is hands down the worst loss of the weekend. But I think they're definitely going to need some kind of help in order to move up. I don't see Georgia dropping down below to the 4 mark. Michigan, unless it looks bad against Purdue, I don't see that happening. TCU, kind of that mix in right there. But I think in order for USC to even be in that conversation, they got to win, and they got to win big over Utah no matter what.
I'm also of the thought that not only would they have to win big, but I mean, even if they did, the committee sometimes shows a lot of hesitancy to move people. I know that was something where people were pushing Boo Corrigan a little bit in the post rankings press call. Was what did Michigan have to do to get past Georgia? And they said, don't get me wrong, when they explain their thoughts, when he's speaking on behalf of the committee, he knows how to make any decision sound, logical and well reasoned. But after something like that, and I mean, they did stick so much to the fact that Ohio State was in it up until, in their mind, even into the fourth quarter. So for that reason, they decided Michigan wasn't going to pass Georgia based on that win compared to, and because that was the way it was phrased. It was like compared to Georgia, winning at home against Georgia Tech. But I think for USC to move up, it would need a loss by one of those other 3 teams. And I'm not saying, and as we've talked about this, the top 2 almost certainly won't fall completely out. But then that might be the reshuffle that would get USC moving up. But if everyone wins out, I'm hesitant to see any real change in that top 4, quite frankly. I mean, do you guys agree with me on that, JD? Serious?
Yep, that's how I see it. I don't think that USC can get past an undefeated team unless maybe if TCU looks really bad against K-State but still pulls it out, like in a close win.
So like almost every other win they've ever had.
Except they figured out how to blow out Iowa State this time, so like that helps. But that combined with USC coming in and just destroying Utah in every possible way and as a total makeup game for the earlier loss in the season, like maybe that would be enough. We're talking like Caleb Williams has like a career day. and USC somehow manages to find a defense. Like everything would have to line up just right. But otherwise, yeah, I think that they're kind of stuck at the 4 spot unless one of those 3 teams loses.
Yeah, and I still think as well, I think one of the other big thing is on top of those losses, it's going to have to depend on how those losses clearly go. I mean, granted, all these teams are playing teams that have at least 3 losses, but there's a different variation of looking back, right? Like if you're Michigan and you lose to Purdue for literally any reason, I think that's probably going to be able to knock you down all the way to 4th, and that would push USC up, I think, by default. But otherwise, you're going to have to see something like Kansas State takes TCU to the woodshed. I think even if TCU, kind of pulls out this BS win like they have been all year long, I really struggle to see how, at least with USC's resume in the way that they have it right now, for them to be able to put them over TCU if TCU is still undefeated, because at the end of the day, that one loss will still be up there. It'll still be pertinent. And we don't really have a situation where, you've had a situation like a 2014 Oregon being ranked above Florida State, for example. Yes, they had the one loss, and they atoned that with the win over Arizona in that championship game. I don't see that, though, with USC happening if TCU continues to go on to win, just because it would be another top 10 win for TCU. It would be another ranked win under their belt. Given the amount of wins and the strength of schedule that they've had, I find it really difficult for them to lose at least their position when it comes to USC, unless there's something disastrous against Kansas State.
Is Nick Saban sitting at home calling other teams saying, let me see how I can help you to win so we can get in?
Well, hi, Aaron. Yeah. Yeah, no, gosh, is Nick Saban, do you think? Oh, you mean like, obviously we're talking about opponents here, of some of these teams. Goodness, wouldn't that be funny if Nick Saban's like, hey, and it's so funny too, because I mean, Nick Saban, and obviously he said it facetiously, but we've gone over this before. When they hired him at Alabama, he joked that they had hired a mediocre coach, but the best recruiter around. And I think to some extent, that is his, he is that ultimate CEO who is focused completely on recruiting. That is his, his MO, and he's proven it works great. But yeah, that'd be really fun. Can I lend you? I don't know if offering to lend somebody Bill O'Brien's has the luster on it that it did perhaps before the season. I love that. What else are you thinking these days, Aaron? I guess Michael. I'm sorry, Michael.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm eating nachos, but I'm just thinking, like, if I were a head coach and I wanted to get into the playoffs, I would be making phone calls. And how can I help another team win, or how can I help another team lose?
Jeff Brom just like magically got a gigantic box of game tape on Michigan and like analysis and breakdowns on them in the mail with like no return address. But there's a postmark in there that seems to come from Alabama for some reason. Yeah, that would be funny. Just, kind of like Bobby Bowden after the Marshall tragedy, sending them, game tape and equipment and stuff, trying to help them out as they were rebuilding, except for more selfish and nefarious reasons.
Serious, are you implying that the Big Ten would ever conspire to make sure that their Big Ten champion looked better than TCU heading into a playoff? I'm sure this is unprecedented.
Oh, I was thinking of trying to help Purdue pull off the Spoiler Maker special, but I guess hopefully Michigan doesn't need any help at all. If they're going to be, beating Purdue as the only unranked Power 5 conference championship game participant, if I read that correctly.
So my question is, well, first of all, to the caller, and I apologize, it's Michael. Who do you? I mean, are you yourself a Bama fan?
Yes. Yeah.
Who would you like to see? I mean, let's say they don't get into the playoff. Who would you like to see them face?
Oh, not in the playoff, dude. I'm so spoiled. It's not fair. It's not fair because, like, if we're not in, we're kind of spoiled.
You are, but I mean, let's say, because as some people have even said, would it ended up being like another Alabama Clemson in the Orange Bowl? That's been thrown out there, although I don't know what the odds are of that. I admit I'm not as I'm not as good as predicting the New Year's Six matches. But would that be something you'd
Oh,
be interested
probably Ohio State. If Ohio State was
in?
still out of it, I'd rather play Ohio State than Clemson, just for prestige, because Clemson's just kind of on the outs this year a little bit. Although we do have the revenge factor because they did punch us in the face in the past. But I think Ohio State would be, if they're not in, then I'd rather play Ohio State than anybody.
Do they have
Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud. That'd be fun. Um, Especially if it right now it looks like neither one's going to be making a push for the Heisman this year. So that could be a really interesting matchup of really talented quarterbacks who just didn't quite get there this year.
So all the buzz is Tennessee is so pissed that Alabama is ranked one spot above them. What do you guys think?
I think one of the things, the takes that I appreciated was Tony Barnhart, the dean of the SEC, where he had noted, in the basketball tournament every single year, the committee will factor in injuries and how that plays out for a team currently. And I think right now, if you're the committee, that injury for Hendon Hooker for being out for the remainder of the year is really reflecting hard back on them. Like, yes, they win and they absolutely destroyed Vandy to close out the season. But you still have to remember, they gave up a huge, absurd amount of points to an unranked South Carolina team. And, when you give up 63 points to an unranked team, that has nothing to do with your quarterback's play. And I think they really kind of look.
JD, what do you think the line would be? Alabama, Tennessee, neutral field. What do you think Vegas would put the line?
Currently, as is, I mean, if you don't have Hendon Hooker, I would probably give Alabama a slight line on that one, at least 3.5. But currently, I mean, you still have to remember, end of day, yes, Tennessee did have that win at home. They did win it by less than 3, which that is technically home field advantage. But I would say, again, more than anything else, I'm appreciating the take of, if the committee is considering injury more than anything else and justifying that for the reason that Alabama is above Tennessee right now, I get that one. But I still also get the entire point of, you play for results on the field. Tennessee ended up being victorious on that one. But I think either way, you're going to see both of these teams in a New Year's Six Bowl this year, no matter what.
Just to add, I know because that was a point that, again, was brought up quite a few times to Boo Corrigan in sort of the post discussion where the press was asking him about why the committee had ranked teams where they were. And, again, one of the questions, was specifically about Alabama and Tennessee being one spot apart. The Tennessee had beat them head to head, and asking basically what your question was. And he said the committee really, the bigger determination was they saw an Alabama team with a couple of close losses, and then they saw a Tennessee team that had such a big loss to South Carolina recently. And it's interesting because at the same time, when they talk about it, when you put them on the spot, they say the committee's trying to be careful about recentism and trying to look at the totality of work. For example, then when they'll talk about USC, they'll say, well, their one loss was the 2-point conversion in a passionate game is how they an emotional game is how we phrased it. And in retrospect, they beat an Oregon State team that ended up being good. But at the same time, I think he also said it also was impressive that they had back-to-back ranked wins against UCLA and then Notre Dame. And this is something I had said a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, USC, it's gonna get that boost by playing Notre Dame towards the end, because try as they might, the media loves that game, and especially the older media love that game. And there's older folks who are on the committee, and that for some reason hits them right in the nostalgia vein. So when USC and Notre Dame play and one of them has a chance to bounce up from it even harder, they tend to really grab onto it because, wow, they beat, that's why historically they're two of the teams that always sometimes get preseason ranks that might be a bit too high. Although this year USC kind of surprised everyone, including USC fans. USC fans are just thrilled with the potential opportunity to get blown out in the semifinal. I'm not even joking. Like, USC fans, if you asked them before the season, would you take a blowout in the semifinal? They would all say, hell yes. So don't get me wrong. USC fans are probably the least egotistical about any of this at this point because they're just happy to be along for the ride. But again, going back, though, to that Alabama-Tennessee split, that was definitely where they were going at. I know you wanted to follow on that, Sirius.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the big winner of so many teams losing this past week, with LSU losing, Clemson losing, was definitely and Oregon was Tennessee. I mean, after that South Carolina loss, like they dropped pretty hard. But luckily, some space cleared out above them, and they were able to come back up. They actually benefited more than Alabama did because of where everybody was ranked. I think that you look at the South Carolina game, and not only is it a bad loss, not only did they lose Hendon Hooker at the end of it for the rest of the season, but it also, I mean, I think most people looking at it said that their offense was what was driving the bus on this, specifically Hendon Hooker leading that offense, and the deep threat that he had developed with Jalen Hyatt, the ability to break out those big plays and score quickly. The defense was always a little suspect, and the South Carolina game really highlighted that. And I know that they were missing a linebacker, but missing a single defensive player shouldn't result in you giving up 63 points. You look at the Vanderbilt game, and there, a lot of people are like, "Oh, but they still managed to score, 55 points. It's 56 points. But they did, with about a 50% completion rate from their quarterback, and basically just breaking off big run after big run after big run. And then they scored 5 touchdowns on 50-plus yard rushing plays. This was not the Tennessee offense that we have seen all season by any means. I mean, Jalen Hyatt didn't even hit 100 yards, only had 3 receptions, no touchdowns. So this wasn't the kind of game where we saw against Alabama or LSU. This was a very, very different offense, and maybe they'll have some kind of a game plan worked out by the time bowl season rolls around. But Joe Milton is not Hendon Hooker, and at the end of the day, Bryce Young is still Bryce Young, and we've seen him pull off crazy stuff on the field all season long with a Alabama team that is not as good as it normally is.
Where would you put the line? Neutral field. Where would you put the line? Alabama.
Without him, right now, without Hendon Hooker.
Yep. Where would you put the line? Neutral field.
At least 7 points for Bama.
I was thinking 10. I was surprised JD said 3.
I dialed it back. I was thinking 10. Alabama's played weird this year, so I dialed it back to 7. But yeah, Alabama has the defense, as much as it struggled this year compared to past years, to take advantage of the limitations that Tennessee now has. Vanderbilt very much did not. And part of it too is just, do you have a secondary that's fast enough and has the legs to be able to run down all of these massive overthrows from Joe Milton and snag a few of them? Because I think that's essentially what it would come down to, and also still be able to contain some of that rush game and prevent those really big chunk yardage plays, because they put up 350 yards of offense of rushing in like 16 minutes of game clock. So they were just scoring at will. So
I know y'all are tired, but JD said he would favor Alabama by 3. You said you would favor Alabama by 7. So do you think the committee thinks like that? They have to. Don't they have to?
I think they do.
Listen from here on out.
No, I absolutely do think they do. And, again, it was so interesting in that, as I said, there were several calls, press calls, I should say, to the committee kind of post-list discussion. And they tried to kind of put Boo Corrigan on the spot about Hendon Hooker's injury and how that much affected the way the committee ranked it. And he, his own quote was like, it was certainly something that we considered, but if you remember, and this is his quote, not mine. If you remember correctly, I believe they were down 49-31 at the time when he went out. We do have more information on their game based on with Vanderbilt, and we go off of what we've seen so far. So someone, again, followed up on that and said, so Tennessee ranking any different if Hendon Hooker's healthy now? And then he did the classic, don't know. That's speculation on our side. Again, we're talking body of work that they have, in the most recent game they had was with Vanderbilt. JD, I know you wanted to bring something up.
Yes, I did. Actually, some breaking news that is coming out right now. So this is from John Bryce over at Football Scoop. A couple of other local reporters as well are starting to chime in on it. UAB has apparently zeroed its coaching search. and the man who will be replacing Bill Clark full time appears to be Trent Dilfer, of all people available. So Trent Dilfer,
What?
the former. Yes. Again, this is why I'm absolutely baffled by this. This is from John Bryce at Football Scoop. So multiple sources in the last 24 hours have told Football Scoop that the Blazers' search has shifted and the focus is now on Super Bowl winning NFL quarterback Trent Dilfer, who guided Nashville private school David Lipscomb Academy to a third straight berth in the TSSAA Division II Class AA state championship. Has the man coached in college football? No, he has not. But UAB, if you want to make some arguments about, the state of Alabama or the Board of Regents trying to keep down Blazers football, this is one of those changes from Bill Clark to Trent Dilfer.
I am stunned by that. I mean, because he's a California boy. I mean, originally, I obviously it's been a long time, but I remember he was at Fresno State, all that stuff. I mean, I grew up in the Central Valley, so he's a Fresno State guy, and yeah, wow. It's always been people again sometimes don't necessarily value exactly how great Bill Clark was at UAB for how tough of that job was, and again, there's a strong chance that Bill Clark may pop up again as a head coach somewhere because it sounds like he's interested in coaching again. And a lot of folks, I think, would be, especially at the teams that aren't necessarily the prestige teams, would be foolish not to consider him because of what he did with UAB, coaching them, taking them through the temporary disbandment of the program that ended up being canceled. So they were able to bring the program back and then doing so well upon his return. But, before Clark got there, there's a reason they tried to shut down, the program. They were awful for many, many years. And gosh, this is right hot on the heels of all those players that, there was they finally tweeted it because they were trying to lobby hard to keep the interim head coach as the possible new as a permanent head coach, but because I believe UAB is 6-6 this season, guys. I think
they are, yeah, with Bryant Vincent as the interim, and the letter came out this morning, midday, from the players, group letter signed by the team, and they said they hadn't been able to get in contact with the president of UAB. They tried to, and were told by the secretary or administrative assistant that they didn't have room in the schedule to meet with them. So they, went to social media to share their view to try to keep Bryant Vincent as the interim head coach. And apparently that didn't work. Going for the guy who is possibly has the biggest asterisk next to Super Bowl winning quarterback in the history of the NFL is quite a choice. Usually that team's the one that's pointed out as you can win a Super Bowl even if you don't have a great quarterback. He's turned into an amazing media career, but wow, what a choice.
We had someone who was coming up to talk about it. It looks like he vanished there. JD, so this school, by the way, guys, this school is actually serious. I should ask you, the school he's at is in Nashville, so it's not too far from where he's at, but presumably, man, what's the last time? There's been.
When you say too far, are we talking like geographically, chronologically, or like actual job responsibilities? Because it's a small private school in Nashville. Because we're not even talking about Lipscomb University, we're talking about Lipscomb Academy, which would be the high school version. Going from that to a G5 program that's about to move up to the AAC, so that's a huge leap, and especially I think he's only been at Lipscomb for a couple of years now, maybe like 3 years. So
yeah,
because in general in Tennessee, like the private schools have their own division, and for the most part, they're not huge. It's not even like you're dealing with a 1,000, 2,000 person high school. Most of those schools are pretty small. So going from that to trying to take over even a G5 program, man, that's a leap.
I'm just trying to remember the last time there was even a remotely successful situation where, and usually they're established high school coaches. They're like high school coaches that are legends, usually in the region where the school is, who've jumped up and then actually been successful on at least the FBS level.
Gus Malzahn.
That's true, but he didn't go immediately into being a head coach. He went. I remember he went with Mitch Mustaine to Arkansas, and then there was that whole fiasco. You probably remember because God, who's the head coach? Houston Nutt ended up switching the offense because he had an amazing running back. So he switched away from I think the plan because that was part of the way they were able to get Mitch Mustaine to come as they brought his head coach, and then I believe he went to another school. It wasn't Tulsa, was it? And then eventually, he became the head coach of Arkansas State. But I mean, that was more of,
he was at Tulsa.
Yeah, that's more of a typical transition because obviously we've interviewed plenty of former high school a couple of great Texas high school head coaches who again moved up through the ranks and then jumped to be college head coaches. I mean, again, UTSA, Texas Tech. There's plenty of examples of coaches who've done just that, just like what Malzahn's done. But yeah, I mean, I know I still remember
Tony Sanchez.
Yeah, I mean, he was the
Bishop Gorman to UNLV,
and he was the last one I remember. But he was like a legend at Bishop Gorman. I mean, Bishop Gorman's one of those high school powers. So that seemed at least you've got a guy who's not only a good football coach at the high school level, but can certainly recruit in a local area. Because schools like UNLV,
80 yeah, he was 85-5 at Bishop Gorman over 6 seasons, and then was 20-40 at UNLV. So I mean, not exactly a great history to look at for coaches who made that immediate transition.
Who was the guy UNT hired? Was it Dodge? I think he was another guy who did that straight transition.
Yeah, Todd Dagey is the one that you're thinking of.
That's right. Todd Dagey. That's it.
Let's go back to Trent Dilfer. He has an eye for quarterbacks. He pulled up Tua from when he was young, and I roll Tide. I'm one of those rare Blazer fans. I went to UAB, but I rolled Tide since I was in second grade. So I do kind of understand football in the South, and I do like the hire. Thank you for breaking the news. Who was that, JD, that broke the news?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll take credit for it. But yeah, I'm still a little in shock by this hire more than anything else because, he's had his experience with Elite 11. He has had the experience of finding young quarterbacks to help mentor them. But the first thing that I immediately start to think of is, if you want to go with talking heads who are good with high school recruits and can help develop talent, I immediately start to think of the Herm Edwards disaster that was Arizona State. When you took a guy who had not been in the ranks of college coaching for 30-something years and then suddenly had a completely new world that he had to deal with. I think especially with Trent Dilfer with them at UAB going into much harder competition in the American, with all the controversy that they've had of the program being shut down and then revived, with this new stadium that's being rebuilt, these new facilities that are coming up. It just baffles me of why Trent Dilfer is the guy. And it almost makes me feel like this is a decision that's not made by an athletic director. Y'all follow me on this? Like, it feels like something that this is dictated down to the athletic director and told, make this happen, as opposed to the athletic director using a search firm to find the guy that they need or fitting in criteria that they need. It just seems very, very odd that Dilfer, out of all of the possible opportunities, ends up being the guy who ends up replacing Bill Clark, who literally revived this program.
Yeah, it definitely kind of feels like that PR search firm, like, oh, look, we can hire this person. They'll make a lot of buzz. It's a nationally known media personality. And, that's kind of the selling point. And some kind of a stuffed shirt who doesn't really know athletics is like, yeah, sure, that sounds great.
No, it's kind of a stepping stone, same as UAB got Jared Haas as a basketball coach, and then he went to Stanford. UAB is kind of a stepping stone. It's a starting place, and they do like the name, but it's a place where we get 3 or 4 or 5 years out of somebody, and then they move on to something better if they're good.
I think that's and that makes sense. I'm just surprised there's no interim step. Like, he's not typically, you at least expect him maybe take, a coordinator.
You took a coordinator, or maybe someone who is like a talented AHC position type coach that's been in the business for a while, like an up and coming name, not somebody who spent 5 years coaching or 4 years coaching high school at a small private school is like his retirement project. I mean, he went 43-10 there. They've lost one game in the past 2 years combined, and they were 2-9 when he took over. So something's working, but also, it's private, so you can recruit. But yeah, I understand the whole idea of it being a stepping stone, but yeah, usually you find somebody who has at least a little bit of a qualification at the college level before handing them the reins. I mean, even FCS teams usually don't go straight to the high school ranks.
Well, we just had one like that. I mean, because we had, Ed McCaffrey. He jumped from high school to FCS Northern Colorado, and they just fired him. I mean, he only had 2 seasons. Because he was technically a 2020, but of course they didn't have a 2020 season at Northern Colorado. But he went like back-to-back 3-8 seasons, and they already let him go. And that was an FCS example. I can think of one guy who has been successful, and he was in the Metroplex, but he didn't go to like a huge team. He went to start a program, restart technically, but Texas Wesleyans, Prudhomme over there, he's built them up. I mean, they were miserable for the first 2 years, but they expected to be. And then he's built up a team that's been a pretty decent winner at NAIA. But again, jumping to some of these levels, it's pretty astonishing. I mean, because you can't help but think of like Jerry Faust or there's just no. There
are very, very few good examples of this ever working. I mean, Kevin Kelly, Presbyterian, again, FCS. Presbyterian hires him after this massive, almost 20-year career as a head coach
and famous.
A huge winning percentage, too. And they fired him after 1 season. He went 2-9 in 1 year, and they called it quits. Like, that's how bad it went for him. So the track record on these hires of coming straight from high school, it's not good.
Interrupting here really quickly, confirmation now from Sports Illustrated, Ross Dellinger also confirming that this is the hire that UAB is going with. And I quote, a splashy stunner, UAB is targeting former Super Bowl champion quarterback Trent Dilfer as its next coach, sources tell SI Now, confirming Football Scoop.
So how long from now are we going to be talking about whether this was a good decision or not? How much room do you think they're going to give him? Like 2 seasons, 3 seasons?
I'm watching Michigan basketball right now, and Juwan Howard turned out to be a really good coach.
Basketball's a bit different, though.
Yeah,
I respect because we see that a lot in the NBA and at college, where you have guys that transfer over from playing career and everything that, from that side of it pretty quickly into getting a head coaching gig if they have the right connections. But football, I think, just because of the size of the programs. And I mean, even if you talk to some of the coordinators and everything, if you catch them in an honest moment, I remember when Derek Mason got hired at Vandy, and he said that he had this like binder full of stuff, like his plan. James Franklin said the exact same thing. He had a binder of his plans as a head coach and what it would involve running a program. Derek Mason famously lost his for a couple of years, found it, said it actually had some useful things that he wished that he could have found earlier. But there are coordinators that have said like the managerial aspects of running a huge staff, dealing with 80 scholarship kids, total on the roster could be 120, 100 or more, depending on the size of the school, and all of your support staff too. Like it is a huge undertaking compared to, like a basketball team where you've got, 15 players. And most of those are going to be your bench guys that aren't going to see a ton of playing time. You're pretty much focused on like 7 of them, and I think that the playbooks are a lot different too, in terms of what kind of plays you're going to be running.
And how familiar? Hey, serious. I got how much could college football changed in the last 28 years?
Is the like the wing T still thing? We still playing like I formation football? But yeah, so I think that that's a little bit different. Deion Sanders, honestly, would probably be your best example of a coach that's been successful. But, I mean, he's been involved at lower levels in various functions for like almost a decade before he got the Jackson State gig.
Is Trent Dilfer the luckiest quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl sitting on that defense? I'm pretty sure he's the worst quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl.
Oh, absolutely.
You might have an argument for Peyton Manning's last one, that last ride, because he leaned on their defense really heavy. but he was still a much more talented quarterback than Trent Dilfer was.
I mean, there's
Like,
still a
hands
couple
down.
of other like pretty bad quarterbacks who still won. I mean, Trent Dilfer obviously is going to be a strong one. The first one I'm immediately thinking of is Brad Johnson from that 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, just completely riding on Warren Sapp's and that incredible defense with John Lynch, and for them being able to pull out Brad Johnson is one of those guys that there's absolutely nothing that is striking about him, including that name. But I think, like, at least in terms of quarterbacks who got lucky, I mean, you got to be like throwing up names like Mark Ripon, Doug Williams. Maybe if you want to argue Jim Plunkett, I could hear that as well. But yeah, Trent Dilfer, at least in terms of like quarterbacks who have won a Super Bowl, he is priming up there of a quarterback who, you don't even want to say game manager, but a guy who got to be a part of that experience.
Hey, I just wanted to welcome. We have one more person up here right now. Tyler, what's up?
What's up, guys? Can y'all hear me?
Sure can.
All right. Since y'all were speaking about quarterbacks like that, I was just thinking of Joe Flacco's.
Man's got 2 Super Bowls. He is elite.
Elite?
A little bit of a throwback.
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess you could say that, but I was just kind of like thinking that his defense kind of carried him a good bit that year with the Ravens.
Going back to what was brought up earlier, I have to say Deion Sanders may be the best argument for someone who did basically just come out of high school and hit the ground running. And I think at this point we can say better than I think anybody expected, other than perhaps the AD who hired him. And even that AD was probably just hoping for a little bit of splash and then, some wins. But I don't think even this is beyond, I think, their expectations. So he may be the best example of someone who came out of high school coaching purely and did that. But man, I Dilfer is still a shock. I mean, unfortunately, still the odds there may not be good. And we have someone else who wanted to join in. Horny Frog, what's up?
Yeah, I just really want to say how amazing it is that TCU did this year. I mean, new coach coming from SMU. We had no shot to do what we're doing right now.
Oh, no kidding. I think, I am obviously biased. I went to TCU. So the fact that they are doing such an incredible job, I think this year has blown away everybody's expectations of Sonny Dykes in year one. I think TCU would have been really happy with like a 7-5 season, showing some signs of life, showing that Max Duggan was going to be the quarterback that was originally promised. But the fact that they are undefeated and, in a very wild sense, currently in a position where theoretically they could still advance to the playoffs with a loss in the conference championship game. I mean, here's the thing. So you want to make all the arguments that you possibly can for that or against that, however you want to split it up. The idea that TCU still has a path that they could get to the playoffs with a loss, I think is an absolutely mind-blowing idea to anybody who follows TCU football. Now, granted, they win, they're in. They win, they're in. I like those chances.
In my opinion, I mean, just like in 2014, they don't play a conference championship and they get left out for a one-loss Ohio State team, and we had a better resume than them. So, and I'm afraid it's going to happen again if we lose.
I mean, there's always that possibility, and especially if, Kansas State runs up the score or something else like that. But, the committee works in mysterious ways. But I think at least with the strength of record, with the wins that they've had so far this season, the ranked wins that they've had so far this season, I feel that TCU is going to be in a good position. And again, they've played fantastic football. However you want to slice it, there are only 3 undefeated teams in the entire country. TCU is somehow one of them. With the first year of Sonny Dykes at the wheel, you've got your offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley. He's officially a finalist for the Broyles Award. Joe Gillespie, who would come in as the defensive coordinator from Tulsa, he's on a lot of short lists right now to be that next head coach up at Tulsa. Momentum is flowing right now in Fort Worth, and it has been a delight to see TCU be this mystery dark horse team that ended up playing this season.
The craziest part to me is that Max Duggan wasn't even a starter from day one. That he got 100%. Benched.
100%.
I don't think this has ever been done. A guy that gets benched, not even starting at the first game of the year, and now he's going to New York for the Heisman Trophy. ceremony. Like, what the hell is this?
It is a magical ride, and I will definitely affirm that. I think the fact that, one of the other things that I think is really striking about the Big 12 as well is, Brett Yomark announced all these branded partnerships a little bit earlier today. And, if you want to talk about a conference that seems that they've suddenly had a life under a new commissioner, the Big 12 is looking really nice for the years to come forward, even with Oklahoma and Texas leaving that conference. I'm really, really pleased to see the way that a lot of these teams have really stepped up. I mean, this is the second consecutive year that neither Texas or Oklahoma is in the championship game. You have a strong opportunity to make a really big statement with sending a new team to the playoffs. And I think overall, just seeing 8 different teams who are bowl eligible. Actually, it might even be no, it is 8. Unfortunately, West Virginia getting that win does not get them up to the APR. But to have 80% of your teams get bowl eligible, to see TCU stay undefeated through all that, a very nice, solid middle class of a Kansas State, of all these other programs that are still in the running for really good teams, and then even teams like Texas Tech. 7-5 against a brutal schedule, but getting wins over Texas and Oklahoma, getting a bunch of ranked wins across the season, and looking really good under the first year with Joey McGuire at the helm. It's a really, really good time right now to be in the Big 12, regardless of what is happening with Oklahoma and Texas. And the fact that TCU seems that they seem pretty primed to be one of those leaders in that new edition of the conference, I think it's wonderful to watch. And obviously, no bias coming out of that.
Yeah, I just wanted to give my 2 cents on the frogs. Thank you.
One thing I just wanted to say is the Big 12 is definitely turning into something interesting under your mark. I was wondering how that would turn out. I was optimistic only because it seems like it was a striking hire to go outside of the box. And the reason I'm bringing it up is something today that caught my attention. And we tweeted it mostly because I found it interesting. But they are doing a cross promotion with, it was buried in a larger announcement, but the Big 12 title game is going to have field marks as well as apparel tie-ins with a bathing ape, which some of you may know it, some of you may not. It's been around for a while. It's actually kind of funny because they're a streetwear brand that was, I remember, huge in 2001, and they were still huge, like 2012, 2011. They were still big then, and they're still around now. But it's from Japan originally, but they've been a huge things in hip hop, and they started, I think, going to sports because last year they put some they got involved in F1 on one race with this camo pattern. So they're gonna have Big 12 stuff that's cross promoted with this. I don't know. They said they're gonna put that camo pattern, and it's not like a true camo pattern. It's really kind of a sort of imagine some kind of I don't want to say foofy, but it's definitely like a sort of a streetwear kind of approach to it. And to me, the Big 12 is probably the least the conference I would have previously least imagined. But at the same time, I know Mark, he was at he was with the Nets. He knows the NBA. NBA's always been a little bit smarter about kind of engaging fans at all levels. Coming into the Big 12, a more formal. I never would have guessed that coming out of them. But now this is. I wrote to them. I actually wrote to the Big 12. I'm like, hey, what's going on here? Is this something coming from him? And he's like, yeah, this is the new commissioner. He wants us to pull out. And I thought it was great because the guy was from the branding department, and they've probably historically been hamstrung because it's like you're in marketing and branding for a very traditional, formal, potentially stodgy organization. You promote, hey, we want to pair up with a bathing ape or bape, and yeah, they said yes. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to do. I don't know. Does that mean SEC is going to pair up with Supreme? That seems like kind of a natural tie-in there. But if it forces more conferences to get more fun, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful, and I kind of hope to see more of it. But I don't know. I just wanted to mention that. That's something that struck me today when that got announced, and I'm hoping we'll share whatever they're coming up with as soon as they get some images out there. But we'll see that soon enough in the Big 12 title game. Again, there we go. Sorry, my own thumb kept hanging me. We're getting close to the end of the hour, but I just want to, again, if you have any feedback, any of you want to come in, talk about college football, any topic, coaching searches, whatever, we'd love to hear from you. JD, did you want to add something?
Yeah, Trent Dilfer won the Sammy Baugh Trophy. I did not realize that. One of the awards for being one of the top quarterbacks. I knew that he had a nice little decorated career at Fresno State, but to be a Sammy Ball winner, and then of course that NCAA record for consecutive pass attempts without a interception that stood for something like 15 years or something like that. Man, I'm still just baffled with this hiring decision. Like, this is, I don't know. There's a part of me that goes like, UAB originally, when they were looking for who they were going to have when they moved up into the American, I thought it'd be some kind of splash hire with momentum, or at least like, keeping on Brian Vincent as the interim of, hey, you know what, we're keeping consistency and going in this direction. This is just one of those hires that is just absolutely baffling to me of, where they looked at this and said, yes, this is a good idea, and this is where we're going with that.
Hey, Adam, you joined us. What's up? What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for letting me speak. So, I guess what I just want to talk about and ask is about sort of the Pac-12, do a post-mortem on them. They've done very well this season, surprisingly, and it's just something that really stood out to me with 6 teams being the top 7 teams. For a conference that I feel is ultimately on the way out, this is a big going out party, and even the championship game, I'm really excited about. Seeing the Utes go back there one more year. Another year is exciting to me. I did my master's at the U, so I'm very partial to them. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on all of it, because it's been a very, very unusually really good year for a league that's very much quieted behind the rest of the Power 5.
And just to clarify, so you did your master's degree at Utah?
That's correct. So I'm very partial to the Utes.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I've been pleasantly surprised. My own, background, like JD, our 2 teams did not expect. I'm a USC alum, undergrad, so that's where I tend to my heart is. And then I'm a Gophers graduate student. Long ago, so that keeps me humble. But hey, they beat Wisconsin anyway. But going back to the Pac-12, I was pleased with the way this season turned out as someone who kind of was disappointed in them year after year, because in addition to Utah, which people expected would do pretty well, certainly that USC Utah game was one of the best games of the season objectively. And it got overshadowed because it was a late night game and there were so many big upsets earlier that same day. But watching the Utes go for that 2-point conversion that ended up being the decide. I mean, that was a game where afterwards both quarterbacks were crying on the sideline because they left it all out there. It was spectacular, and it was in Salt Lake City, so you could sense that excitement. It was tangible. But I think what really surprised us, I mean, Oregon, again, they were expecting them to probably be the team in the North. The 2 teams that I think are the unsung heroes are Washington, 10-2. Surprising Oregon when they played them. They've been a stronger team than I think most people expected them to be, but also Oregon State. And that goes back to that USC Oregon State game kind of earlier in the season. It was a mystery game because USC at that point was still undefeated, and so was Oregon State. And then they had a game that ended up being just a defensive slugfest. No one expected that. Everyone thought it was going to be a firefight, which is what we saw with the Utah game and what we've seen with the UCLA game that USC split. But that team, that game ended up being just really close. And it was that moment in the season where you're like, is USC now showing its weak spots and their offense somehow got corralled and there's going to be a strong defense that stops them? Or is Oregon State really good? And now we see Oregon State ranked 15 in the latest CFP poll at 9-3. They upset Oregon. Well, upset Oregon. At this point, it's hard to tell, So I think that those 2 teams specifically have definitely made the Pac-12 a more well-rounded conference and certainly better than they had been in the past. JD Sirius, what do you think on this?
I think low-key, at least when it comes to the Pac-12, Jonathan Smith at Oregon State deserves a couple of votes for Coach of the Year. Just low-key, under the radar, has turned Oregon State into a credible, wonderful team that, especially during, what was formerly called the Civil War game with Oregon and Oregon State, they were down by a significant margin in the third quarter, stopped passing with, I think, about 7 minutes left in the third quarter, and ended up winning 38 to 34 or something around that way. The fact that Oregon State is now able to stay consistent and win games, I think that's something incredible, and especially for Jonathan Smith to come back to his alma mater, help them get some new facilities. and really kind of bring them up to a higher level in the Pac-12, especially in a year where, Kalen DeBoer, in his very first year at Washington, is now having them on the doorstep of the Rose Bowl with a, very high ranking as well. You've got Utah continuing to be incredibly consistent. They still have an opportunity to win the Pac-12 this year, get into the Rose Bowl for another year. And then USC, of course, being a national power, that sleeping giant rising up once again. And then, we haven't even mentioned UCLA, which for a while looked like they might be that competition for, a playoff spot for a hot moment. And then still, even with that, you have a logjam of teams that, very consistent, solid play. They don't lose to the teams that they aren't supposed to lose to. The Pac-12 this year has been incredible football to watch and very, very fun to do so.
I just want to add, I know we've talked about this in terms of why the committee didn't put Alabama ahead of Tennessee despite the head-to-head, and they emphasized the loss to South Carolina, even though, as we've said, that Vandy win was solid, but I think there was the Tennessee team they saw play Vandy wasn't quite the same one that had impressed them before. And when they talk about Washington, that came up a bit too, because Oregon State has had 3 losses, but they're all, to USC, to Utah, and to Washington, 3 teams that are all ranked in the CFP. With Washington, even though they have 2 losses, they really were holding on to the fact that Washington had lost to Arizona State, because they had 1 loss and just they couldn't work it out. It was, 45-38. Yeah, it was an away game, but this is after Arizona State had already fired Herm Edwards. It just didn't make sense how that loss ever occurred. So that's why they said they had ranked a 9-3 Utah, 1 ahead of a 10-2 Washington. So, we were talking about that earlier in the show about Alabama, Tennessee, but yeah, here we are talking about it again. It's been about an hour. We want to go ahead and wrap this up. We typically wrap up after about an hour when we can. And I know we've got a couple of different conflicts on our schedules. So on behalf of myself, Bob Ekayeri, on behalf of JD Moore, on behalf of Sirius, we always enjoy talking to you guys on Tuesday night. And we keep doing these. And we'll probably do a few more in the middle of the week as well. Well, not in the middle, but as the coaching search goes on, I have a feeling Sunday we may have some more discussion. And we keep working on getting guests now that the flu has finally cleared out of my system. So I wanted to say thanks to all of you who joined us. We always enjoy hearing from you, talking college football, talking whatever you enjoy talking about. And it was an interesting discussion. And hey, we all as a group learned that Trent Dilfer looks like he's going to be the next head coach of UAB. Who knew that? So we're all a little bit more informed at the end of this conversation. Anyways, we hope you all have a great night. Now I'm going to hang up and listen.